Well, the good news is self-compassion isn't difficult. And the reason it's not difficult is because most of us already know how to be compassionate to others, right? Most of us have developed some sort of good friendship. Often, if you think about what a good friend is, it's a relationship that's defined by mutual compassion and support and understanding and caring. Sometimes our children, for instance, we aren't the most compassionate with because we identify with them. Sometimes our partners, we're kind of too close and we identify with them. So sometimes we aren't our most compassionate selves. But typically we have a good close friend we know how to be compassionate to. And we can use that as a model for how to be compassionate to ourselves.
2, 1, 0.
Hi, and welcome to Stellar Life Podcast. This is your host, Orion. Thank you so much for being here and taking the time to learn about self-compassion. We are all on a healing journey from the day we're born. We're just learning how to accept ourselves and love ourselves. When we were kids, we were born whole and complete, and then things happen in our past and interactions with people and authority figures that told us some things, that formed some beliefs. And a lot of us lost self-compassion. A lot of us forgot that we are worthy of anything just because we are, including your Thule, who is sometimes very critical with herself and is getting better and better every day though. And even though I'm teaching that stuff, right? I'm teaching self-love and blah, 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 blah. And I'm working on it. I'm not in it every day. And sometimes I forget to be more loving and more compassionate with myself. So we always need reminders, all of us. And I'm happy that my guest reminded me of that today. Her name is Kristin Neff. She's a pioneer in self-compassion research, conducting the first empirical studies on the construct over 20 years ago. She has been recognized as one of the most influential researchers in psychology worldwide. Kristin has written several best-selling books on self-compassion and co-founded the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion. And so today's conversation is like a little hug, teaching you how to literally hug yourself when you're in times of stress. Love yourself and believe that when you are kinder to yourself and more loving and more compassionate, you can be more successful. And it doesn't happen overnight. And it's not a straight line like with any goal. And there is actually no end goal to self-compassion. Like, how deep is self-compassion, right? So it's only a matter of taking it step by step. Every day. If every day you love yourself a little bit more and you have a little bit more self-compassion toward yourself, you are already winning. And if you forget, hey, just listen to this podcast again, or have someone that loves you remind you that you're pretty awesome. And now, without further ado, on to the show. Hi, Kristin, and welcome to Stellar Life Podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me, Orion. I'm happy to be here.
Yes. How did you discover your passion for self-compassion? It rhymes. That's kind of cool.
Well, I suppose self-compassion discovered me, really. So it was my last year of graduate school at UC Berkeley, and I was going through a really hard time in my life. I had just gotten a divorce, and I was feeling a lot of self-doubt and kind of shame about the failed marriage. And I was also feeling a lot of stress about the fact that I was going to get my PhD with no job prospects in sight, and thinking, oh my God, I wasted all of this time, and what am I going to do? I'm going to be overqualified. And so I actually started to learn mindfulness meditation because I had heard that it was good for stress. Unfortunately for me, the course was taught in the tradition of Thich Nhat Hanh. You may have heard of him. He's a Zen Buddhist teacher, recently passed, who always talked a lot about self-compassion, about the importance of turning compassion inward as well as outward. I was really kind of taken aback. I mean, I heard about compassion, of course, but I'd never really thought about consciously, intentionally giving myself compassion for the stress I was going through. So I tried it out that night when I got home for the very first course. I got home and I started speaking to myself kind of like I would speak to a friend in a supportive manner and saying, Kristin, this is really a hard time for you. I'm here for you. And I was just so impressed by the immediate difference it made in my ability to cope with all the stress I was going through. So that's kind of how I got into it as a personal practice. And then when I finally did get a job at UT Austin, where I'm at now, I decided to research it. So that's basically the trajectory.
How do you research self-compassion?
So I had actually done some postdoctoral research with a woman who studied self-esteem. And this self-esteem is typically measured with self-report scales, like I like myself, I don't like myself. And it was actually while I was working with her that I thought, well, self-compassion is such a perfect alternative to self-esteem, because you don't have to be like special and above average. You don't have to be better than anyone. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be a flawed human being with compassion. So I just decided to make a self-report measure with items like, I tend to be kind to myself when I'm going through a difficult time, or I tend to be hard on myself, or I tend to feel all alone. So I created a model of self-compassion, which I can talk about later, with 3 components, and then I created a scale to measure it. And that really launched the research field. And now there are over 5,000 studies on self-compassion. It's a huge research field. There's other ways of researching it now, like including training people to be self-compassionate and seeing how that changes their lives.
Yeah, what is the model for self-compassion?
So, and by the way, it's, I kind of maybe was the first in academia to publish a model, but other people think of self-compassion different ways. So my way isn't necessarily the right way. But I could define it as 3 components. So the first is the most obvious, which is kindness, being kind, supportive, as opposed to harshly judgmental. But there's also, I realized that you have to have mindfulness in order to be self-compassionate. It wasn't a mistake that I heard about self-compassion in a mindfulness course, because really, compassion, the word passion means to suffer, come is with. We have to be with our suffering in a kind way. But we need mindfulness to be with our suffering, because normally the last thing we want to do in the world is be aware of our pain. We want to fight it. We want to ignore it, anything but be with it. So we have to have the skills of mindfulness to turn toward, and kind of with some space around the pain so we aren't so overwhelmed with it, in order to give ourselves that warmth and kindness. And then the third element, which is really key, is a sense of connectedness to humanity. And this is what differentiates self-compassion from self-pity. And even though the word self is in self-compassion, it's not really about me, it's about us, right? So, and that's really the difference between compassion and pity in general. If I pity you, I feel separate from you. I'm looking down on you. If I have compassion for you, it's like, hey, Orion, I've been there. Something similar happened to me. So the exact same thing with self-compassion. We recognize that everyone makes mistakes, everyone's flawed, everyone struggles in some way or another, and that this is actually what connects us to others, as opposed to some sort of poor me, isolated attitude. So those are the 3 components of self-compassion in my model.
Yeah, so kindness, mindfulness, and what was the third one you did?
Common humanity. Or you can call it connectedness if you like. I call it common humanity, but you can call it connectedness.
Because when people are in victim mode, they only see themselves. There is no connection to the rest of the world. They're almost like in a bubble.
Exactly. So you think like everyone else in this world is living a normal, perfect life. Normal is perfect, and like abnormal is something's not perfect, which when it's actually the opposite. Normal is imperfect. Most people have some sort of struggles. That everyone makes mistakes. This is actually what it means to be a human being. Perfection and humanity do not go together, but we forget that.
So you've been researching this for such a long time. Do you still get surprised with some data that you receive?
To be totally honest, not so much anymore. I mean, actually, some of my colleagues said, Kristin, the research is getting fairly boring because it all shows the self-compassion is good for you. I mean, it's really almost good at anything you throw at it, because anytime you're with suffering in a supportive way, it's going to be good for you, right? And so even people that you might assume, the things that you might assume it's going to make you weak, it doesn't. It makes you stronger. You might assume it's going to make you less motivated. It's quite the opposite. It makes you more motivated. It has you take more responsibility. So pretty much at this point, the research doesn't surprise me very much, because it generally comes out positively. And so now I'm actually focused a little less on the research and more on teaching self-compassion to people, because I don't need to do any more research to know that it's really valuable. I'm really curious about how do we help people be more self-compassionate, especially if they find it difficult.
And how can self-compassion lead to self-esteem?
So you might say that self-compassion is a form of, I would use the word self-worth as opposed to self-esteem. Now, I'm playing with language a little bit, and there's no one right definition. But if you think of self-esteem, that word esteem is a judgment or evaluation. I esteem myself to be worthy or not worthy, right? Whereas self-worth is kind of like what self-esteem is, with the end result of what you're esteeming yourself for.
Yeah, English is my second language. I never reviewed that. Like, it was like self-esteem, like it's one word. I never broke it into two and thought, oh, esteem, I'm
Yeah,
judging
well, a
myself.
lot of people don't think of it, but
Yeah.
so self-worth is, the self-worth of self-compassion is unconditional because it just depends on being a human being. So you always have it in good times and bad.
Yeah.
Self-esteem, some people have unconditional self-esteem, but usually
It's
people
conditional.
only judge themselves to be worthy if they're special and above average, if they're succeeding in what's important to them, if they look a certain way, if other people like them. So it actually tends to be very conditional and unstable. So, again, I prefer the word self-worth. I think it's a little more accurate in terms of what we're aiming for. Self-esteem, for instance, little kids, why do they start to bully others? For self-esteem, because they want to judge themselves positively in relation to like the nerdy kid. Why do people have prejudice? Partly because they want to feel like their group is superior, because that helps them esteem themselves. So it's not necessarily a good thing, self-esteem, although a feeling of self-worth is very important, of course.
How do we increase self-worth?
Increase our self-worth. Well, also self-compassion, right? So what the research shows is that the more you practice self-compassion, the higher your sense of self-worth. But really important, there's a way to measure self-worth that isn't contingent, that doesn't depend, is unconditional, that you have in times of failure and success. And so with self-compassion, again, because you stop evaluating your sense of worthiness based on the externals, again, what society thinks, or whether I'm succeeding or making my sales target or look the way I want to look, and you start valuing yourself purely because you're a human being, right? You're kind of going to the core of what it means to be an aware human being who is living on this planet, and when you do that, that increases your sense of self-worth.
Do you feel like from the time that you started to now, you on your own personal journey have achieved a different level of self-worth that is nothing to do with the environment?
Yeah, so basically, here's the way it works for me, and I think for many people. It's not like the environment that you don't care at all. You still care. It still hurts if I get a bad review, for instance, or if someone doesn't like the way I'm dressed or whatever. But it doesn't carry the same weight, right? So yeah, maybe that stings, and it's not pleasant, but my core sense of self-worth isn't dependent on what other people think of me, or even on success. So even though I might feel a moment of shame, or I might still feel a moment of like, ooh, I really wish that person had written a positive review as opposed to a negative review, it doesn't throw me. I don't take it seriously the way I used to. I'm kind of aware, oh, that's just my ego trying to feel good about itself. Well, that's understandable. But, who am I really? So what my self-compassion practice has helped me to. So if you think of compassion is how we're with our suffering. And so even when things are painful, if we're with our difficulties with a sense of loving, connected presence, which are the three components of self-compassion: kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness. Loving, connected presence feels good. It's actually what most of us are after in life, to feel love and connection and to be present with our lives. So what starts to happen is more important than what's happening is how am I relating to what's happening? Is my heart open? Do I feel connected to others? Do I feel alive in this moment, or am I lost in thought about the past or the future? And when you can do that, that actually over time starts to be more important than what's happening. It's not that what's happening doesn't matter. Of course it does, but it's not the most important thing. The most important thing is my heart open in the moment.
Wow.
Sometimes you forget that and you have to kind of sometimes I still have to remind it myself, but it's easier than it used to be.
And how does one start practicing self-compassion?
Well, the good news is self-compassion isn't difficult. And the reason it's not difficult is because most of us already know how to be compassionate to others, right? Most of us have developed some sort of good friendship. Often, if you think about what a good friend is, it's a relationship that's defined by mutual compassion and support and understanding and caring. Sometimes our children, for instance, we aren't the most compassionate with because we identify with them. Sometimes our partners, we're kind of too close and we identify with them. So sometimes we aren't our most compassionate selves. But typically we have a good close friend we know how to be compassionate to. And we can use that as a model for how to be compassionate to ourselves. We can even just say, well, what if my best friend was in this situation? What would I say to my friend? Would I say, you stupid loser, I hate you? Probably not. If so, they wouldn't be your friend anymore, right? You'd probably say something like, hey, it's okay. You did the best you can. Everyone makes mistakes. I care about you. So we know what to say. We also know how to say it. So you can use that as a template for how to be compassionate to yourself. It's not so much that it's difficult to do. What's challenging is to remember to do it because our culture and even our physiology to some extent kind of leads us to be more self-critical by nature. So you have to remember and remind ourselves. But once we do that, it's not rocket science.
Yeah, I often tend to overgive or overexert myself, and I put. I mean, I have a small child. He's 3.5, but of course I'll put him in front, before me. But it just seems like I give a lot, and I am actually in the practice of receiving. I had to go through surgery recently, and I accepted friends. I actually asked. I was like, "Hey, I need help. Come and help me." And that was a big deal for me to ask for help and allow them to come and cook for me, which was really sweet. I feel like I'm very critical of myself. So for somebody like me, like I set the bar really, really high, and I'm a superwoman, and I need to do this and this and this. And she's like, how do you calm me down and allow me to connect with myself to do, like, I have a lot of compassion for others. I'm very empathic. When it comes to me, not so much sometimes.
Right, right. And so again, that's most people actually. Most people are a lot more compassionate to others than yourself. And so, really, if you think about what's the effect of your self-criticism, it's probably the same effect as if those friends you cared about, you were that critical toward. So it'd probably have some negative effects. And so those same negative effects are occurring for you. There's part of you that thinks you're setting your bar high. Well, self-compassion has nothing to do with whether or not you set your bar high. It's really about how do you motivate yourself to reach that bar? Do you motivate yourself by saying, if you don't reach this goal, I'm going to hate you. That means you're a loser. I'm shaming you. Well, that criticism and shame actually doesn't help you very well reach the bar. More important is, okay, first of all, if the bar is important to you, sometimes it's not. Sometimes self-compassion may say, is it really so important that, I look perfect, for instance? Maybe not. But whatever you do decide is really valuable and true to your authentic self, if you care about it, you're going to want to reach your goals. And so if you fail to reach your goals, instead of shaming yourself, which just makes it harder to learn, you encourage yourself. You say, okay, well, darn, I wish I would have done better. It's okay, everyone fails, everyone falls short. This is really important. This is part of the process. How can I learn and grow? What can I learn from the failure so that I can do better next time? Just because I failed doesn't mean that I am a failure, right? And that actually gives you the energy and motivation to keep going. And again, the research is pretty clear on this, that self-criticism kind of works, but it has a lot of downsides. It makes you nervous. It can create fear of failure. It can interfere with your ability to learn properly when you have information that's coming in. It can kind of narrow your mindset so you can't see the bigger picture. So self-compassion, you can still, if you want to be a superwoman, if it's really truly important to you, you can still be a superwoman, but you get there through kind of encouragement as opposed to shame. Much more effective.
Yes, for me, it was post-surgery getting so frustrated with not being able to do all the things that I have to do, and maybe pushing my body a little overboard.
Right. And then what happens when you do that, it's just not that effective,
Mm-mm.
Because first of
No,
all,
not at all.
if you push yourself overboard, you can get exhausted. Even in terms of caring for others, if you try to be superwoman and give and give and give, and you don't have compassion flow inward, you're going to burn out, guaranteed. Right. So compassion, it's not like you have a limited source. You've got to, it's not like you have 5 units and if you spend 3 on yourself, you only have 2 left over for others. It's the opposite. It's additive. So the more compassion flows inward, the more compassion you have available to flow outward. So that's why, for instance, self-compassion is key to reducing burnout. Because if it just goes one way, your cup is going to run dry eventually.
Right. And when you are in a state of self-compassion, you model to others, and then you allow them to accept themselves a little more.
Exactly. So one of the best ways to teach self-compassion to others, people always ask me, how can I teach this to my kids or my friends? The best way is actually to model it, especially if you model it out loud. So, in front of your kid, let's say you have a favorite vase and you accidentally knock it over and shatter it. Well, if you say, "Oh, I'm such a stupid idiot," you're modeling for your child. That's the best way to react when you make a mistake. But if you say, "Oh, I love that vase. Oh, that makes me so sad." Well, it happens, it's part of being human. Maybe next time I'll put it in a safer place or I'll try to be more careful, but it's okay. Just because I made this mistake doesn't mean that, there's anything bad about me. So when you model that, other people internalize your dialogue and then they start learning that mistakes are something to learn from as opposed to shame yourself for.
Right. So with my son, I do that. I say, "Oh no, I made a mistake. Is that okay to make mistakes?" And he's like, "Yes, it's okay to make mistakes."
Perfect. Yeah.
But sometimes
You don't really mean it though. You're just doing it for him.
no, when it's really obvious, I do mean it. But a lot of time when little things happen and energetically, I don't say anything, but energetically, people read energies more than what we say.
They
So
do.
that's where I need to be mindful of with self-criticism.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, so this is another reason why self-compassion is like the best gift we can give to others because of the way the brain is structured, interpersonal neurobiology, we're always, our mirror neurons, we're always resonating with others' emotions. And so if we walk around frustrated and angry and critical of ourselves, other people are subtly at the pre-verbal level resonating with that. And especially for caregivers. So if you're caring for someone in pain, whether it's your child or maybe your therapist, you are resonating with their pain and you're feeling it inside your own brain.
I feel everything. I'm like mega empathic. I feel people and things and environments to my bones. It's always like that.
So you have to give yourself compassion for your empathic pain, right? So in other words, give yourself compassion for the fact that you're hurting, even if it's not your pain, even if it's secondary pain, you're still hurting. And then so you can actually learn in some ways to regulate other people's emotions. So for instance, my son, he's autistic. He's 21 now and he's doing really well. But when he was younger, he would have a really hard time with tantrums and controlling his emotions. And, he would tantrum just almost at any point. And so what I learned to do when he was tantruming is give myself compassion for how overwhelmed and like how difficult it was to be experiencing this tantrum. And that was the way I could best reach him. If I calmed myself down, then he would start to calm down and then I could work with him directly.
I do that intuitively in bedtime when I try to put him to sleep. I'll calm my nervous system down and almost get sleepy. And when I'm calm and sleepy, he'll fall asleep more easily.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's the way it works. So we're connected to each other. So what we cultivate inside affects everyone we come into contact with.
So what's the first step to get into that of like practicing that mindfulness? I guess awareness was what you were saying.
Yeah, so first of all, just being aware that you're struggling. So often we're just so lost in problem solving or trying to fix it or trying to get rid of the problem. We don't even pause to say, hey, this is really hard right now. So that's really the first step is acknowledging that we're struggling, right? And then you could, mindfulness is the first step. But then the other two can come in any order. Often I go to common humanities second, because oftentimes not only are we hurting, we're exacerbating the pain by the fact that we think something's wrong with us. It's just us. We feel all alone. It's like we're kicking ourselves when we're down, because not only are we hurting, we feel abnormal and isolated and all alone because we're hurting. So reminding yourself that you aren't alone. This is normal. Many, many other people feel the same as you do. Most people in your situation would feel something similar, part of being human. And so when you do that, you feel less isolated. You kind of have a bigger perspective. And then you can give yourself kindness. And so there's a few different ways to give yourself the kindness. One is through language. Very easy. You can say, well, what would I say to my good friend if they were going through the same thing? And you can try saying something similar to yourself. A lot of it's tone, right? What's your internal tone? Is it cold or harsh? Can you try to make it can you try to soften your internal tone with yourself? That helps. And then touch is really huge. Because as human beings, touch evolved as the main signal of compassion. As a mother, little babies, before they know language, they understand your care through your caring touch. You know how to touch in a way that's soothing and comforting. So you can actually touch yourself. It looks a little funny, but if no one's looking, you can put your hands on your heart, your hands on your face. You can give yourself a hug. You can kind of hold yourself. You can rock yourself. Some sort of touch is a really good way of giving your body the care it needs. And sometimes it can reach your body before it can reach your head. So, and then there's other little practices. I have a ton of practices on my website for free. So it's pretty easy to access.
Do you have any rituals or in the morning or in the evening or things that you do throughout the day to anchor yourself in self-compassion?
Right. So many people do. So meditation's a very good one. If you meditate, I don't meditate as often as I used to, but I go on retreats fairly often, meditation retreats. So meditation is a great way to develop self-compassion, because you kind of calm and center yourself. But for me, really, anytime I feel discomfort, emotional discomfort, is when I practice self-compassion, which is really when you need it. So anytime I have a thought, or I'm feeling stressed, or I'm upset about something, or my partner says something that, ouch, like any time I'm feeling pain is actually when I practice self-compassion. So you can do it either way. You can either do it as, for instance, loving kindness meditation. It's a common form of meditation where you actually practice wishing yourself well, and we know that helps build the muscle of self-compassion. But alternatively, you can just practice self-compassion whenever you're hurting. You stub your toe, or your partner says something that that you don't like, or your child is upset, or then that's really, from my point of view, the best time to practice self-compassion.
Yeah. As just an image came to mind. In NLP, there is pattern interrupt, where something happens and then you do something ridiculous or funny or extraordinary to snap yourself out of it. So I guess you said you can stub your toe and say, "I'm the greatest, most beautiful woman in the world. Ow!"
You could. It's interesting though. I don't know. You probably didn't mean it that way, but just to be clear, self-compassion isn't positive affirmations.
Okay.
It's very different than positive affirmations. Positive affirmations might be something like, "I'm the greatest person in the world. I'm the most beautiful," or "every day I'm getting stronger." The problem with positive affirmations is the research is pretty clear. They help if you already think well of yourself, but if you don't, they actually make it worse, because there's a contrast between what you're saying to yourself and what you believe about yourself. And also positive affirmations aren't opening to the pain. They're pretending the pain isn't there. Self-compassion acknowledges, hey, look in the mirror. I don't look like I did when I was 30 or 40. Okay, that's the truth. So instead of pretending that that's not true, can I open to the pain of that, right? It's self-compassion is about opening to reality and the reality of pain in a kind, connected way.
When I was in a very dark time in my life, extremely dark, and I looked at myself in the mirror, and I studied the work of Louise Hay and mirror work, and I told to myself, I love you. And my reflection was like the, I was just crying. I couldn't say I love you to myself. But for me, I stuck with it every day. And the first day I was crying, the second day I was crying, the third day I was able not to cry and just look at myself. And by repeating that over and over and over again, actually it did help me to start loving myself,
But I love you isn't a positive affirmation,
isn't it?
right? I love you is not, you aren't saying I am perfect. You're just saying I love you.
Okay.
That's true, right? So you're tapping into the part of yourself, the loving part of yourself. Positive affirmations are things like things that aren't true necessarily. Like, I am rich and I'm successful and, I'm the smartest person in the world, or things like that.
That's an exaggeration because if from what I learned, when you say a positive affirmation, you say something that is relatively believable, like I'm getting better and better every day.
But you may not be. See, that's the thing. It depends if it's believable. Then I would say that's compatible with self-compassion. What the research shows is that if it's not believable, it actually can make it
No,
worse.
of course, yeah, you can't.
I mean, it's all these things. It depends how
It's
you
all
do
it's
it.
all very very delicate, and there's
It's all
something.
very delicate. But the really important thing with self-compassion is you aren't avoiding pain, right? So saying I love you, to my mind, doesn't avoid pain. Actually, the love is what allows you to open to the pain. It's only if you use them as a way to cover up what's there that it could be a problem.
Yeah, thank you for that clarity.
Because we need to open, like the thing, like, I'm getting younger every day. Well, I'm not getting younger every day. Believe me, I'm not getting younger every day. I'm not, but it doesn't mean that I can't look in the mirror and still see beauty there. But it's not based on, it's changing.
Yeah, there are some biohackers out there that are now starting to reverse their biological age. It's just pretty
Right.
wild.
Well, okay.
That's a different conversation. That's not
That
probably.
is, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there any difference in self-compassion between women and men?
Yes, yes. And so it's not a matter of like biological sex. It's not even a matter of necessarily gender identity. If you might be non-binary or identify as a man or a woman, the difference really comes from gender role socialization. In other words, like the shoe boxes society puts people in, that women are supposed to be this way and men are supposed to be that way. So what we know is that there's a couple ways it works, the socialization. Women are socialized to be more compassionate to others than men are socialized to be. And so women generally do turn out to be more compassionate to others than men. But women are socialized not to meet their own needs. They feel less entitled to meet their own needs, partly because the power of patriarchy and partly because we like self-sacrificing women. And so women have a little less self-compassion than men do. So it's not that men are necessarily highly self-compassionate. It's just that men feel more entitled to meet their needs. On the other hand, if you go to one of my workshops, most of the people who show up are women, or girls and women, is because, again, compassion isn't part of the male gender role. And so it's kind of, even though men have feel a little more entitled to give themselves self-compassion, they're actually less comfortable using it as a tool because it's not part of their socialization schema. And then another way gender comes into it is, I like to talk about these. There's two different faces of self-compassion. There's the fierce and the tender. So tender self-compassion is about acceptance of ourselves with all our flaws, acceptance of our life and our emotions, the fact that, yeah, it's not perfect. But there's also a fierce side of compassion, which is about making change to alleviate suffering, right? Like drawing boundaries, saying no, meeting your own needs, motivating change. Those are all really key parts of self-compassion, and I call that fierce self-compassion. So gender role socialization, allows men to be fierce, go out there to make change or to stand up, and, speak up, but they aren't allowed to be tender. They're actually often criticized or bullied if they're too tender. People raised as girls or women, they're allowed to be tender toward others, but they aren't allowed to be fierce. They're called different names if they're too aggressive or too ambitious, right? And so gender role socialization interferes with the ability to have a balance. We all need a balance of fierce and tender. It's like yin and yang. We need both. And gender role socialization prevents us from integrating these two sides of self-compassion in a balanced way.
If somebody is listening right now and they don't have a lot of self-compassion, or they criticize themselves a lot, they don't think they're good enough, what would you tell them to do?
Yeah, so first of all, I would say notice the pain of that, right? Just notice the pain of not feeling that you're good enough, the pain of self-criticism, just the discomfort of that. So that's the mindfulness. Notice the pain of that. Common humanity, you aren't alone. Actually, most people tend to be harder on themselves than they are to others. It doesn't mean that something's wrong with you for doing this. It seems to be fairly natural for humans to criticize themselves. And then just try giving yourself some kindness for the pain of not feeling you don't deserve it. I mean, it sounds counterintuitive, but what would you say to a friend who said, I don't think I deserve kindness? Probably your heart would go, what do you mean? I care about you. Of course you deserve kindness. Your heart would go out. You'd feel that warmth, that tenderness towards your friend if they said they didn't feel they deserve kindness. And so you can actually see if you can feel that way towards yourself. Let yourself be moved by the pain of not having self-compassion. So that's one way. If you feel you don't deserve it. Other ways you can do it is through physical touch. So instead of starting with the brain, which is more mental, just go ahead and put your hands on your heart. Maybe your body can still respond even if your mind's having a little trouble following. Putting your hands on your heart and just kind of comforting yourself, again, for the pain of that or the pain of whatever you're going through. So you really just have to start with small steps. But you can relate to whatever you're going through in a more open-hearted way.
Yes. So when I opened up on the WhatsApp group, I said I went through surgery. I need help. It could be paid help, or if you guys anyone that wants to come and volunteer, you're welcome. And I wrote it in a, lightly, but it really affected the discussion in the group. First, I had amazing women show up and help me. But then within the group, people started congratulating me for my courage to speak up, because I had times where I was the leader in the group, and I did a night where I did hypnotherapy for the ladies and stuff like that. So they were like, wow, you're so brave to ask for help. I came here just because of your bravery. I was like, okay, I'm brave. Great. That's awesome. Very validating. I appreciate that. And then they started opening up and telling each other about their suffering and sharing it in the group. And it became this beautiful ongoing discussion and support and back and forth. And none of it would have happened if I didn't ask for help and was vulnerable and had enough self-compassion to say, hey, I need help. It's okay to ask for help. So I guess that's my message to that listener that needs to hear it right now. Ask for help. People love to help. Maybe not everybody, not everybody showed up. I had 3 ladies showed up, but people will show up for you, and the right people will show up for you in the right time if you ask for help. You don't need to carry all the weight on your shoulders all the time. And you can also take this weight off by connecting to your faith, to the Creator, and connect to that power that makes your heart beat, and ask God, or whatever you call it, to take your suffering away and help you. That this is also a form of self-compassion when you get help from an energetic or spiritual level, and also physically just ask for help, because somebody will reach out to you. And I know that in the past when I needed help, people helped me, and that's why I chose my profession, and now I help others. So when you actually ask for help, you give others the gift of helping you, and they're gaining something out of that too.
Yeah, no, I think what you're pointing to is really key, and again, that's under the umbrella of common humanity, right? Interconnection. You could call common humanity connectedness if you want. And so what you did when you opened up to the group, you made them relate to you. You helped them relate to you in terms of your humanity, and then people helping each other is also part of humanity. And like I said, there's not a lot of self and self-compassion. Really, it's about us as human beings, all struggling and doing the best we can. And asking for help is a beautiful act of self-compassion. What you're doing is you are letting go of your ego at that point, that wanted to feel like you were a strong superwoman who didn't need help, and you're being vulnerable enough to ask for it, which is, an incredible act of self-love and self-kindness.
But also another thing is trust the process. Because in the beginning, I didn't get many responses except like, "Oh, you're so brave to ask for help." It's like, okay, who's gonna help me? So trust the process because it's gonna come. It's gonna come.
And then also knowing that, we aren't, although it's amazing when help comes from the outside, one of the things self-compassion gives you is allows you to meet a lot of your own needs from the inside. So, for instance, if we feel really lonely and we kind of assume that we need someone else, maybe a partner, to meet that need to make us feel fulfilled, but often what the loneliness is a signal that we aren't fully connecting with ourselves, with our being, like we're just lost in maybe thought or desires, but we aren't realizing that our own heart, our own presence, our own feeling of being connected to the larger whole is in and of itself satisfying and fulfilling, right? And so that's a one way self-compassion can help us meet our own needs. Doesn't mean we don't need other people, of course not, but we aren't so needy. We aren't needy for other people. We can actually meet a lot of those needs ourselves, and that actually allows us to give more relationships and to be more authentic, to have it be more reciprocal. So the three
What are
top
your three
tips for
top tips to
self-compassion,
living a stellar life?
one is actually, this is kind of going to sound a little paradoxical, but we have to make sure when you're practicing self-compassion to not use it as yet another technique to try to make the pain go away. Right? So self-compassion really has to involve we're opening to the pain, and then we're there for ourselves, caring for ourselves because we're in pain. If we use it as like, I'm going to put my hand on my heart to try to make the pain go away, then we're losing our mindfulness. We aren't opening to the pain. So that's one tip. Sometimes I like to say the only way out is through. You have to be able to open to the pain and then be with yourself in the journey. There's no shortcut. So, if you try to use self-compassion as a shortcut to get rid of the pain, it's not going to work. So that's one tip. Another tip is just really, again, go with what works best for you. You can give compassion. I give compassion to myself. You can give compassion. A part of me, the compassionate part of me, the wise part of me gives compassion to maybe the hurt part of me, the little child part of me. You can think of it that way. You can think of what would you say to a friend and make a U-turn. Or you could think of what would a compassionate other say to me? What would my grandparents say? Or, Jesus say? Or some other spiritual figure, or, someone you admire. Ted Lasso, maybe, and it's a fictional character. So there's a lot of ways in terms of people ask, who's giving compassion to who? Well, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day because it's all happening within your own mind. So you just play with what entry doorway works best for you, and then go with that. There's no one right way to practice self-compassion. And then, so I think there's several tips in there, but yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Where can people find you and learn to be practitioners or get your book?
Yeah, so the easiest thing is just to go to my website, selfcompassion.org, or if you just Google self-compassion, you'll find me. My website comes up. And so I have several books out. I've got a book called Self-Compassion, a book on fierce self-compassion. I also have a workbook. the Mindful Self-Compassion Workbook, which has tons of concrete exercises. I teach workshops, or else you can go to the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion, which is the nonprofit I co-founded, where they have a ton of self-compassion training online.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and helping us all be a bit more compassionate with ourselves.
Okay. Thank you, Orion. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. And thank you, listener. Remember to open your heart and work through the pain. Give yourself compassion as if you are talking to a small child, or as if you, or put yourself in the perspective of a good friend, and really mind your self-talk and be loving and kind to yourself, because you deserve it. And have a stellar life. This is Orion. Till next time.